Hi guys, welcome back to the Football Diary podcast once again. Thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about international break today, and normally that's a pretty dull subject, but actually the Nations League has kind of injected a bit of excitement into it this time. And you've probably noticed that France are the new winners of the competition. They beat Spain 2-1 in the final at the weekend. And it was a pretty entertaining finals all in all. I think this tournament's a strange format, but it's winning people over slowly, isn't it? From what you've seen, Dave, of the performances of France and Spain, what have you made of the two teams? Because they both took the competition pretty seriously, it's fair to say. What have we learned about them both and the Nations League going forward?
I think we've France and foremost. Firstly, they look like they are beginning to gain some momentum. They are definitely showing a lot more in their football. We've seen it in moments, obviously. Speaking of obviously the Euros and in certain games, for instance against Switzerland, in moments in that game they looked absolutely brilliant. But we also saw the other side to them where they can lose concentration and let teams back into games. With the amount of talent that they have, they could field 2 or 3 different teams, and they'll probably still beat most of them. So at the end of the day, I think it's all about. We've obviously spoke about the coach before. It looks like we've got a formula, starting to get a formula together with those players and finding a way of getting results. So, of course, I feel as though the tournament itself, obviously the Nations League, still in the process of building that prestige, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, it has made for some brilliant games to watch. And another entertaining couple of semis, really.
Very true.
And the final was a really eye-catching game. And you've got I can't really just praise France. I've got to say, obviously, in terms of Spain, they are starting to rebuild as a team. They've obviously got some really interesting prospects in there in Pedri, and Barcelona somehow keep churning out these these players out there, where Gavi has also come into the team, and it's his first or second, I think, appearance for Spain.
17 as well. Insane.
It's taken it in his stride, and it's actually, just as a team, they're just always easy on the eye, honestly. But those two as 2 players, I think, just watching them and how they actually performed on that stage against experienced internationals, in that France team, just Pogba, and they actually held their own. It was a really good game.
Yeah, I think the first half was in danger of being a bit dull. But that's mainly because Spain just had the ball pretty much all the time. They just dominated possession, really. And like you said, Gavi was out of this world. I didn't expect to see that kind of maturity from a 17-year-old, really, having played so few games. But him and Pedri look like a future partnership, don't they? Really look really, really good midfield players against some very experienced stars, like you said. But yeah, the first half was a bit of a dull watch, but the second half exploded into life when Spain scored and Oyarzabal scored the opening goal. And it was coming, to be honest. They were kind of pushing and knocking on the door for that goal, and their possession really deserved something. But the way France came back was as impressive. I thought the Benzema goal was fantastic. And then Kylian Mbappe scores the winner. I don't know if you've seen the replay of the goal, because they didn't mention it on Sky at the time, but it was offside. The ball was played through to him and he was in an offside position. But a toe from Eric Garcia diverted the ball into his path, which made the goal stand. So this weird offside rule where that one touch changed the course of the ball, it actually didn't. You couldn't even tell the ball had even moved. But that meant the goal stood. So it's a bit harsh on Spain, I thought, but France's quality kind of shone through in the end, I thought.
Yeah, for me, it was offside. I mean, we had this last season with Man City Villa, didn't we? When there was a lot of confusion around that, and a lot of people saying, well, it should have been offside. Well, and there was a lot of people saying, oh, it wasn't offside because the player made a deliberate touch.
Yeah.
Made a deliberate attempt to, to affect, the change of the course of the ball, and he tried to clear it, and obviously that kind of then changed into a different phase of play. I mean, there's still a lot of kind of confusion around it, and it can't really be happening, especially in finals, at this level. So I think there needs to be a bit more clarity around some of those rules, because it's coming out now saying, "Oh, it should have been ruled offside." We don't actually know what the rule is exactly in those sort of moments. It seems to be very particular, and I don't think it's fair for a game of that magnitude to be decided by a decision, one way or the other. It just needs to be clear.
Well, that's the thing. It's not VAR that made the decision. It's the rule change, isn't it? So because they deemed Garcia's toe to touch the ball, it creates a new phase of play. So therefore, the fact that Mbappe was offside when the ball was played is irrelevant, because it wasn't him that played the ball. Technically, it was Garcia's toe, which is absolute rubbish. Yeah, it didn't make any difference to the where the ball went, did it? So how was that affecting play? How was that a pass? How was that an intervention in any way, shape, or form? It's ridiculous.
I just think those actions are too close together for it to be a different phase of play.
Yeah, 100%.
Half a second later, if
Yeah.
he's offside, he's offside. And I feel like we're just getting too clever, really, now with some of these rules that are coming into play, that it's just not needed, right? And it's almost creating a lot of confusion, and kind of even bringing VAR into it even more, looking for the slightest controversial decisions, and it's just delays the game even more, because the game's they're spending minutes looking at video footage, and it's just not.
Yeah, it was a bit pointless, really. And I think to the naked eye, I assumed it was going to be offside. I thought they were going to pull back play. But I think even the Sky commentators didn't really mention it until like a few minutes before the end of the game, that the goal stood because of that reason. So I think everybody was a bit kind of in the dark about the decision and why.
Yeah, I think it's been blown up a little bit more today. I know Jamie Redknapp, has come out and said that he's been offside. A couple of others have said it shouldn't have been allowed. But, we've been in this boat before, haven't we?
Yeah, it's well, to be honest, it's not going to take anything away from what's been a decent kind of Nations League finals, really, because started with the semi-finals earlier in the week, and France beat Belgium 3-2, which was a cracking game again. And then Italy lost out their unbeaten record to Spain from a Ferran Torres brace, with Bonucci being sent off. So, for drama, the Nations League's really providing it so far, isn't it? What did you think of the semis, Dave?
Yeah, I think the semis were probably better than the final, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot to admire from the final itself, but there were probably two more exciting games and more drama that were, that came out of the semis. Obviously, Italy finally their record coming to a close. Yeah, I think you've got to give Spain a lot of credit, really, because Italy is as a team of what we've seen in the last year or so. The team, haven't they? Really, they've gone on this impressive record, and Spain, for them to beat them in that game and get to the final and just missing out, I think you've got to give them a lot of credit.
Definitely.
Italy, I think they can be proud of what they've achieved. Definitely, in terms of the moment, a couple of moments in that game, obviously the Bonucci moment probably changed it and shifted it massively, especially Spain being kind of the possession-based team that they are, and obviously being a man up, would only benefit them. There was a lot of tired legs in that Italy team. I think, Spain really managed the game really well. Bonucci,
Stupid red, isn't it, really? But I mean, his yellow card initially was for argument with the referee, I think, the first one. So it was kind of a bit of a terrible red to concede, isn't it, really, to have 2 yellows and one of them be for that. So it's a bit unlucky that the game wasn't saved as a spectacle.
No, it's one of those, isn't it? You have them in the game and you sort of hope those silly yellow cards aren't going to cost you. You think, oh, we've got, another 45 minutes or something left over. Fortunately, he's gained another yellow card and it's kind of killed the spectacle a little bit in a way. But I'm kind of glad that Spain did get to the final, just because Italy, it wouldn't have been a surprise if they had got to the final. It just allowed for us to see a little bit more of what this Spanish team is about.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway for me from this, is that Spain are actually a lot better than we thought. They've got a lot of young players that are kind of taking the baton from the older generation, and actually forming a pretty decent team. I think Luis Enrique's kind of got them playing a brand of football that's true to the Spanish way of playing, isn't it? But the youngsters they've given the chance to in a tournament like the Nations League, where, let's face it, you probably wouldn't see Gavi being thrown into like a World Cup final, would you, in any other sort of scenario? But the Nations League's like a safe sort of space for him to experiment with that kind of decision, and it's really paid off. And I think the Spain players will be a lot better for this experience, definitely, because they played some tough opposition. Would have done them the world of good.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's, again, I think it's an opportunity for young players to kind of go out and compete at a high level, because a lot of these teams are still wanting to win this competition.
Yeah.
And we've seen that with, a few other teams that brought other players in. To just give them opportunity to play for the international team, and see how they can compete.
Yeah, it's definitely something that the teams are taking seriously now, I think. But as for Italy, obviously their unbeaten run has come to an end. One person that really wanted to have a keen look at how Italy performed is Myles, and he watched the game for us too.
So the Nations League saw Italy's 37-game unbeaten run, record-breaking run, come to an end in the semi-finals against Spain, who were very impressive actually, although the game can be also accredited to Italy being kind of underwhelming, sadly, for the Italians. I think the sending off from Bonucci obviously played a massive part, and it was a funny one to call, really. He does kind of have a look at the opposing player as he goes in with the elbow. And I think what doesn't help him is the momentum of the contact. So he leans up like this, and as he comes back through, his elbow follows through too. And that seemed to go against him, really, and look a bit more deliberate than maybe it was. But he accepted the decision and moved off. And at times, Italy looked like they might get back into the game. I think Chiesa looked threatening as always. He was incredible at times, actually, and Unai Simon did very well to keep him out. So some positives to take from Italy, but to be honest, Spain were the better side. Ferran Torres looks a fantastic player playing for Spain and is a really good finisher. But then, of course, back to winning ways in the third place final for Italy, which was a much better result against a weak Belgium side, you'd probably say. But again, some brilliant stand-up performances in the Italian camp, and they were definitely not at full strength either. Definitely worth noting how brilliant Barella's goal was. His volley was executed perfectly from what the commentator was in the middle of saying, oh, it's another bad corner, as Barella struck the ball into the back of the net, which is always quite funny. But he wasn't wrong. It was a poor corner. Cleared half by the Belgian defender, and Barella was just on the edge of the box to swipe it home with a beautiful volley, punishing Belgium again. So he'll have been happy with that goal. And then, of course, Chiesa was brought down in the box by Leicester's Castagna, and it led to a penalty, and Berardi dispatched fairly unconvincingly, actually. Courtois did get a hand to it and maybe should have done better, but the goal stood all the same, and Italy will be grateful of the fact that it helped them towards third place. They definitely got caught out on the counter. The defence looked quite weak, actually, for a team that's been so stable at the back for so long. But again, from a poor Italian corner, a quick counter-attack meant that the Belgians got a consolation, it turned out to be. And I think a few things worth noting about these games were, first of all, Donnarumma made some very good saves across the two games, but also had a lot of shaky moments where he just doesn't look like the same confident keeper that we saw at the Euros or saw for AC last season. He looked a bit shaky, and at one point he palmed the ball onto the post against Spain, and Bonucci was there to kind of bail him out, and maybe he could do better for the Belgian goal. He leaves himself in quite a wide position and the ball slips under his legs. He parried the ball out into the area at one point as well in the Belgian game, which really could have been costly, and dropped a catch as well. He doesn't seem as confident all of a sudden, and perhaps the move to PSG and his kind of lack of first team game time there might be taking its toll already. It's not necessarily worked out so well so far, but a world-class keeper, I'm sure, will get back to some fine form. Worth noting how many of the Italian side are nominated for the Ballon d'Or as well, and I think I've said it before on this podcast, I think Jorginho's in for a fantastic shout for it. I think he deserves it after the year he's had, and Donnarumma is also up for it too. So it'd be interesting to see if an Italian can take home the award after their wonderful Euros triumph. And Mancini will be confident that even though they couldn't get past Spain and take the Nations League trophy home, which I think that would have been the aim, let's be honest, they seem to take it very seriously. There's definitely things Mancini can take as positives from the experience. As mentioned, Chiesa's form looks electric. He's so good for both club and country right now, and he's just so dynamic and creates things out of nothing and always seems to be a threat. And that's a really handy tool when, as good as Ciro Immobile is for club side, he's never really shown it on the international stage. So having an attacking player like Chiesa at your disposal is fantastic. And of course, there are other players that are worth highlighting. Barella continues to impress in a wonderful volley, like I said, from him. Continues his fine form in the national team. And I really wanted to give a mention to Pellegrini as well, who's started the season fantastically with Roma and then got a goal. All right, fair enough, all of Chiesa's making against Spain too, but it'd be great for him to get on the score sheet for the national side. Really encouraging. So well done to Italy for picking up a third. Not quite what they would have wanted, but it's a job done by the Italians still, isn't it?
So yeah, that's the Nations League, Dave. Pretty decent tournament really overall. And I think it does make that international break feel a little bit more alive, doesn't it? Because do you remember when we just used to have like meaningless friendlies just to fill the gap rather between tournaments, as well as the qualifiers, which were, to be honest, as boring as we expected them to be. Obviously, England played. We're not going to talk about that really because it was a routine 5-0 win against Andorra. But yeah, the Nations League freshened things up. I'm really pleased with it as a format. Do you reckon teams will be taking it seriously going forward still?
Yeah, I think, there needs to be a clear structure in place, I feel, as to when, the finals are, because to be honest, I completely forgot until I was made aware that these games, were taking place. And I was just like, completely forgot about it.
Yeah, but what a bonus to have, like in the middle of a random week in October, just to have a few quite meaningful international games. I thought it was quite nice. I mean, obviously the games were delayed, weren't they, from the summer because of the impact of COVID, but it made this international week for me a little bit better, to be fair. So yeah, I'm all for it. But moving on from the Nations League, like I said, I'm not going to speak about England in too much detail because their win was really the definition of like routine, wasn't it? But I want to talk about Newcastle United because they're kind of hot topic at the moment. Obviously, their takeover has now been approved by a Saudi-led consortium. I'm being told it's an investment group that represents the Saudi government and not the actual Saudi government, whatever that means. But it's all smoke and mirrors. But they're now suddenly the most valuable club in world football, which is crazy to kind of get your head around. What's your take on it, Dave? I mean, I think Newcastle fans have been so relieved to get away from the Mike Ashley era because it's been, 14 years of just bad management of the club. You kind of understand why they're relieved to kind of see that period come to an end. But is this something to be celebrating, to see this much wealth coming from where it's coming from at such a short notice, really? Would you be happy as a Newcastle fan?
You can understand, the previous frustrations of Newcastle, and they've obviously gone through a torrid time over the last couple of decades, I would say.
Yeah.
For myself, obviously, being Man United fan, it's not nice to have another owner of this stature come in. And for me, they are, in a group of owners now that, along with Man City and PSG, that for me shouldn't have a place in football. And people can argue all they want about, the European Super League, but the Premier League is probably going to become the exact same thing. There's going to be a group of owners in this league that are just so powerful that you could say that they're almost franchise clubs, because they're going to be too good to ever get relegated because of the amount of the kind of players that they're going to have. And you're going to have, teams like, for instance, Leicester, who are trying to make that next step to break into a top 4 team. Obviously they failed the last couple of years, but they've been in there and around, there and about it. They're going to see a team like Newcastle come in and spend 300, 400 million probably over the next 18, 24 months. Financial fair play will get the finger, and they'll go and do what they want, bring in all these players on this ridiculous money, and they're going to take probably Leicester's position, leapfrog them, in the space of a year or 2 years, and it kind of undoes all the work that Leicester have done to get into that position. And that for me is the real shame, because there's going to be a lot of teams that are, they want to compete in this season, and fair competition is what people want. And for a supporter, from someone as myself, it just makes game. It puts me off football.
I think so. Yeah, I think as a Man United fan, I'm old enough to remember when the takeover from Sky B was blocked back in the 2000s. I think it was, or maybe the late 90s. United were on the verge of being taken over by Sky B, which would have been a huge conflict of interest, apparently. But the concern mainly from United fans was that they were getting so much money coming into the club, they would have made competition kind of impossible. And United fans fought hard to block that happening, because United have never needed financial support from anybody. And I think that's what you, as a fan, want to see. You want to see your club kind of standing on its own 2 feet the right way. You could argue Leicester City, to an extent, have had huge financial payouts from their owners, but it's been incremental. It's been over a few years. It's been not hundreds of millions of pounds in one season, for example. I think that's the worry. When you see that much money being spent in such a short space of time, it's massively unfair, because nobody can keep up with that. So I think they've kind of activated some kind of like Football Manager cheat code in real life, haven't they? And that's the thing with these ownership models. There's no limit to what kind of owners can own a football club. And I think the Premier League have kind of turned a blind eye to screening owners, haven't they? They're not giving them any kind of, kind of due diligence really to see if they are right for the club, or they're going to have the best interests of the club at heart. So I think for most fans, the romantic notion of your club kind of being successful on merit is gone. And I think Newcastle are one of those clubs that are going to be that way in a few years' time. Like you said, they'll be top 4 challengers, probably win a trophy along the way in the next few years. And how's that going to feel, as a Newcastle fan? Probably amazing initially, but I mean, City fans must be going through it now, where it becomes a little bit hollow, doesn't it? Like, what's the point? If you're spending that much money, you expect to win, and that's what is going to happen in the end to these big clubs.
The only thing that Newcastle will have over Man City is they actually have a fan base, whereas Man City,
you're right, yeah.
Newcastle might actually gain a few fans from Man City if they start to be the club the top dogs. But yeah, again, it's just it's disheartening. It's disheartening for myself as a United supporter. And that's not just because we're not on top anymore. It's just, I don't want to see players come into that club for this, just getting your Robinhos in, You want players who actually want to play for the club, not just because they're being offered 300,000 a week. And, it's all obviously with Man City. It took them quite a few years, didn't it, for them to actually win it, to actually win a trophy. Probably be the same case again with Newcastle, but there needs to be something that comes into place to stop this from happening. It makes you question the bodies of football. What are their priorities and what are their ideas, going forward? Because it just seems like there's not a care in the world for it.
Well, I think the Premier League are going to turn a blind eye to an extent, because it just means more money coming into the Premier League, which is only good for the brand of the Premier League, isn't it? So I don't think they are going to particularly look into, for example, where the money comes from, where the money from Abu Dhabi comes from, where the money from the Saudi consortium comes from, and what kind of ethical questions that kind of raises. That gets swept under the carpet. So that's a whole other conversation, the whole ethical side of it. But from the financial fair play side of it and competition side of it, for me and you, I think from what you're saying, that's the most worrying thing.
I think what you can say is, I think a different kind of supporter is going to be brought in amongst all this.
Definitely.
We've seen obviously with Man United, and when obviously they got bought out by the Glazers, and a lot of supporters went over to FC United Manchester. It's going to be completely different. You start to question it as a supporter yourself, really, kind of.
Yeah.
The kind of football that we actually loved, 10, 15 years ago, because even now, lots has changed with the game. It does make you change. It does make you think about whether it's the game is actually better than it was all those years ago.
It just makes success for your club a little bit hollow, I think, when success is bought. I think so anyway. It doesn't feel as much of an achievement.
100%. It makes you question the direction of where the sport's going, and it's we're becoming more Americanized, if anything.
Definitely, yeah.
Even the word that it's all becoming one big franchise in a way. The Champions League at the minute, it's the same teams over and over that are kind of get into the latter stage. With the exception of the Premier League clubs that have done really well over the last couple of years. Again, obviously that came with money as well. The amount of money that the Premier League is getting. But there definitely needs to be something that's brought into place too. And the sad thing is, apparently, that none of these other Premier League clubs were made aware that this buyout was at the closing stages. There wasn't a meeting, or the clubs weren't made aware that this was going on in the background. It's obviously all just came out and it's been finalised and done and dusted. So there's been no room for any arguments or anything like that from other clubs, or it just seems as though the Premier League were desperate for it to just get over the line. And it makes me question and wonder what changed from them, blocking it before to now somehow, and them coming out with this ridiculous statement saying that it's not backed by, the state, which, we know it is.
Yeah.
Well, how else is it, coming about? Just because there's a few people on the board that aren't, don't represent, Saudis. It's, I don't know what to say anymore.
Well, they'll probably go on a massive PR offensive, won't they, to try and make it look like it's a legitimate takeover, and that there's going to be people on the board, like you say, of Newcastle that will be more relatable for the fans. But I don't think the fans are stupid. And I reckon if it was any other club than Newcastle right now, who obviously have got a lot of negative recent history to draw upon, to make this move seem like a positive thing for them, I think any other club in their sort of situation would have been up in arms about it. I think they would have fought it a bit harder. Can you imagine sort of, I'm trying to think of a mid-table Premier League club really that are kind of quite ambitious, getting bought out in this kind of way. Trying to think who comes to mind really. But then I think most of the clubs in the Premier League have got foreign owners now with some kind of large backing, haven't they? But on this scale seems unprecedented, doesn't it? And I just think they've picked the right club in Newcastle, really, to kind of go under the radar a little bit, because they are desperate for some kind of change at board level, at ownership level. And the fans will buy it. I think they had something like 91% approval rating from the Newcastle fans that they asked from the supporters club, which you can kind of get, but it's overlooking an awful lot of things to make it go through, isn't it? And if you want to sell your soul for a bit of short-term success, then fair enough. But I think, me personally, the fact that the Glazers are at United still makes me feel sick. We don't need them. They're not given to the club. They're taken from the club, and we were fine beforehand. I'd rather see my club earn success than buy it, definitely.
Yeah, obviously, comparing the two, you'd probably say you'd rather have the Glazers in charge of your roster, even though,
which is crazy, isn't it?
Which is, sounds mental to say, but you're speaking about, obviously, two evils, really. One which is far worse, the other one which is greed and, only interested in pretty much financial gains.
Well, that's the thing. You've either got financial gain on one side, or what seems to be like political gain on the other side. So sort of the sports washing of clubs is becoming more acceptable now. It started with Chelsea all the way back in the early 2000s. People stood up and went, hang on, how can this be a thing? Can a foreign owner come in and buy a club outright and just go crazy spending? It felt like a one-off, to be fair, Chelsea, but then the last decade it's become a lot more common. And obviously the Man City takeover, the PSG takeover, this is just the start of it. I think they'll cherry pick cities and clubs that are kind of sleeping giants and kind of wake them up with money. And Newcastle's a really prime example of that happening. I could see it happening to a Leeds United, with some history. I could see it happening to a few English teams. And I think that's the fear for me, is that the Premier League is kind of becoming a bit of a super league in itself, which is, it's not what you want to see. You want to see competition. And I'm kind of drawn to sort of competitions like Serie A now and like the Bundesliga, because they seem like more of a level playing field than the Premier League ever will.
Yeah, I mean, Chelsea have been around in that bracket for a while now, and obviously they were kind of one of the first sort of that leap. But the thing about Chelsea is they were a top 4 team at the time when they were bought out. They were kind of competing, maybe to a lower level, but they were still up. And a lot of the clubs that are getting bought out now, Man City was a big club.
No history. Yeah.
No history. PSG, that they weren't particularly a big team. They weren't an elite team. The only reason I thought they were big is because they have Ronaldinho. That was the first time, and I thought, do you know what? And that's I think a lot of people kind of really knew them for Ronaldinho back then. Obviously, what's going to happen with Newcastle as well?
That begs my question, actually, Dave. If you're thinking of Newcastle with all this money all of a sudden, how do you think they're going to spend it? Do you reckon it will be a sudden splurge in January and that they'll be spending sort of 100 million plus every single transfer window now? Or will it be more sort of measured than that? Because is anyone going to want to go to Newcastle for a start? I mean, look where they are in the league at the minute.
Yeah, it's going to be a similar case to how Man City started, really, isn't it? They're going to offer the big bucks and try and get these younger, talented players in for these big amounts and hope that they come to Newcastle to play competitive Premier League football before they make the jump to a bigger club. And I feel that's all it's going to be for a while, until they get sort of the depth and quality in that, from 1 to 11 in that team. They aren't going to be able to compete. Fans are still going to have to be paid. And you've got to say now, they're not going to be able to attract the likes of the biggest players in the world, even with all that money, because it's different. The game's changed, even since Man City first came in onto the scene. All those years ago, there's such a an awareness of brand. Brands of clubs and what they represent. Social media make a huge difference with it as well. A lot of these players think differently now before they join clubs as well. We've seen we see teams kind of like, for instance, Liverpool and Manchester United. Liverpool was still able to kind of attract some of these players, kind of even when they were sort of in obscurity and in that little patch before, obviously, they won the league and the Champions League. And they still have that history behind them to attract players. And some teams, don't have that. Newcastle certainly don't have that.
I can see Newcastle starting off buying, like you said, potential really, but players in sort of the £20 million, £25 million bracket, but a few of them just for squad depth mainly. I think my only concern for them is they've not really got much of a history of buying big players in recent times anyway. So they've got no kind of director of football structure. They've got no real scouting network that goes for elite players. So all these things take time to sort of embed. So I do worry about what kind of players they'll bring in initially. They'll probably have a few flops that are just going to be really expensive flops as well. So weird times for Newcastle fans, isn't it?
Yeah, I can see them looking at players sort of on the fringes. You've obviously got like Martial at United. Wouldn't surprise me to see him go for someone like him. Riyad Mahrez at Man City. He's pretty much won everything apart from the Champions League with Man City. If they're going to offer him big money, he might make a step, and he's kind of done all he needs to do at Man City. Players probably like that who aren't playing first team football at some of those big clubs, they might try and target them. That's not to say the players will go there, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Well, if enough money's been waved in front of them, maybe. But I think the first thing they'll do is probably sack Steve Bruce, looking at the way things are, and try and get an elite coach in charge, or the most elite coach that will come to Newcastle. So again, that's another question mark. Who do you bring in to kickstart a project like this at this stage of a new season? Who are they going to get?
I mean, I know you and Myles kind of earmarked them as relegation candidates. I mean, can you imagine now if that's how it went down after all this?
Yeah, I don't know how they bounce back from the Championship, because it's not like they can spend a fortune, is it, in financial fair play terms? But again, attracting the right caliber of players is going to be a challenge for them for a few years, isn't it? Because they're still the 19th best team in the country right now. So it's not like they're in a position to challenge for anything just yet. So, yeah, interesting to see. And also a little bit worrying, because the whole Super League conversation and the way football's been kind of washed out with money lately, especially during a pandemic, just looks sort of grossly bloated, doesn't it, at the top end? And we talk about like elite players and where they're going to go next, And Mbappe's obviously been linked to Real Madrid, who are actually struggling financially. So I imagine Newcastle fans rubbing their hands with glee, thinking, do you know what, we can go for Mbappe now. But there's not many clubs that can afford elite players, and they've now become one of these clubs that can actually pay the fee and the wages that these players demand. So I think it's a matter of time, really, before they are sort of signing players of that caliber, sadly.
Yeah, like you say, I think it'll be a few years yet before they can, and the players are attracted to, a team of their stature, because they are, for me, still very much they're a relegation threatened at the moment, but they are very much a mid-table team. They're not the team that they were, in the the late 90s, early 2000s, when they had some of the players that they did, and they were kind of vying for the title with United, Blackburn Rovers, at the time. So there's a long way for them to come back, and they might get there eventually. They probably will. It's inevitable. They probably will back it. They will be up there. But, whether they can big strides, win trophies, it's still a big ask.
Yeah, I think whatever happens anyway, it's going to be not that dull to watch, is it? It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a bit exciting, at least. So we've got that to think of as football fans, but I think it still feels a little bit kind of dirty for a Newcastle takeover to come with this much money involved. And I just hope they don't go crazy in the transfer market straight away, and they do sort of keep it measured to at least not look so blatantly, I don't know, throwing their wealth around from the off. I think that's the only sort of small mercy we can hope for, really, but we'll see. Anyway, that's enough talk about Newcastle for now. We actually got a lot of conversation about them. If you have any comments on the Newcastle situation, just leave them in the comments below if you can. That'd be interesting to hear your take on it as football fans too. But thank you so much for joining us for this week's edition of the Football Diary podcast. If you like our content, please do hit the like button on the video. That'd be really appreciated. Or even just hit the subscribe bell if you can. That really supports the channel going forward. But in the meantime, Dave, thanks so much for your time, mate. We'll talk again next week, and I think it'll be back to Premier League on next Monday's edition, which will be a bit more down to earth and a bit more refreshing, hopefully, a bit more wholesome than talking about the Newcastle situation. But thank you, mate, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.